I never thought that other people's children would change my life forever. Two little angels with empty eyes turned my world upside down. This is the story of how I, a man who had everything and nothing at the same time, found the true meaning of life. My name is Alexei Viktorovich Sokolov. I am 42 years old and single. My net worth is estimated at 2.5 billion rubles. I have an apartment on Ostazenka, a house in Barvika, a villa in Sardinia, a dozen companies under my control, hundreds of people carrying out my orders, thousands of decisions made daily, and not a single person I could call family. My day started the same every morning. 5:30, the alarm clock ringing, a run around the nearby pond, a shower, breakfast prepared by the housekeeper, a black suit, a driver waiting at the entrance, the office by 8 o'clock in the morning. There were meetings, calls, contracts, numbers, endless numbers adding up to millions. My office was located in the glass tower of Moscow City, from the height of the 60th floor. The city seemed like a toy. Small cars, small people, small problems. But my problems were always big, at least I thought so then. A failed deal, bad investments, a partner's betrayal. I considered these real tragedies. I had everything that money could buy. A watch collection worth a 3-room apartment in the center. A wardrobe updated every season. A fleet of 5 cars that I hardly ever drove. Strangely, the more I acquired, the less joy these things brought me. The emptiness inside only grew. Women came and went. Models, actresses, businesswomen, beautiful, smart, ambitious. I showered them with gifts, took them to the best resorts, showed them the world, but none of them stayed for long. Perhaps they felt the icy shell around my heart. Perhaps I myself didn't allow them to get too close. On weekends, I often went out of town to my house in Barvika. 3 floors, a swimming pool, a sauna, a cinema, a tennis court, and an echoing silence, broken only by the footsteps of the guards outside. I would sit with a glass of whiskey by the fireplace and watch the fire for hours. Sometimes I called my mother, who lived in Spain, on the money I sent her. Our conversations were short and formal. My father died when I was 15. A heart attack right at work. He was a simple engineer, an honest and principled man. The 90s spared us, but there was no prosperity in the family. After his death, I vowed that I would never live in poverty. I worked, studied, and fought my way to the top by any means. I got an economics degree, started with a small business, took risks, fell, rose, and eventually built an empire. My empire grew, and with it my status. There were interviews in Forbes, a photo on the cover of RBK, invitations to private receptions, handshakes with ministers, respect, envy, fear. I reveled in power and influence. It seemed to me that I had finally achieved everything I had dreamed of. Early in the spring of last year, I decided to spend the weekend out of town. I needed to think about a new project, 800 million in investments in a promising technology company. My analytics department had prepared a 100-page report, which I was going to study in peace and quiet. The weather was bleak, with wet snow and wind, typical March in the Moscow region. I usually drove along the Rublovskoy highway, but that day I decided to take the Novorizhskoy. There was less traffic and more beautiful scenery. My driver, Igor, confidently drove the Mercedes, and I was browsing the latest news on my tablet. We were passing a small village when, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something strange on the side of the road. 2 small figures almost merging with the gray landscape. At first, I thought I was imagining things. Children can't be alone on the highway in this weather, but something made me turn around. 2 small silhouettes, motionless. I ordered Igor to stop and turn around. He was surprised but obeyed the order. We slowly drove to the side of the road, and then I saw them. 2 girls, completely identical, no more than 6 years old, in identical blue coats, soaked with snow, with identical light braids, with identical frightened eyes. They were holding hands and looking at the road as if they were waiting for someone who wasn't coming back. I lowered the window, and cold air rushed into the cabin. The girls turned their heads. Their faces were pale, with cheeks and noses reddened from the cold. They looked at me warily, without fear, but with some kind of deep doom that cannot be seen in a child's eyes. I asked what they were doing here alone. One of the girls, the one standing slightly in front, replied that they were waiting for their dad. He said he would be back soon. I asked how long they had been waiting. The girl replied that it had been since morning. It was almost 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I got out of the car, ignoring the wet snow falling on my expensive coat. I squatted down in front of the girls and asked what their names were. They answered almost simultaneously, Vera and Nadia, twins. I asked where their mother was. The girls exchanged glances. Vera said that her mother had gone to heaven 2 years ago. Since then, they had lived with their dad, but this was not their real dad. This was their mother's new husband. I began to understand what had happened, but I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to believe that someone could abandon 2 little children in the middle of the road in the cold. I asked if they had any relatives, a grandmother or grandfather. Nadia shook her head. Grandma had also gone to heaven, and Grandpa lived far away and didn't like them. A car passing by slowed down. A woman behind the wheel looked curiously at the strange scene. A richly dressed man talking to 2 children on the side of the road. She lingered for a second but then drove on. No one wanted to interfere in other people's problems. I offered the girls to get in the car, warm up, and decide what to do next. They didn't move. Vera said that her dad had told them to wait here. He promised to come back. If they left, he wouldn't find them. I assured them that we would leave a note for their dad. He would be able to find them when he returned. After much persuasion, the girls reluctantly got into the car. They held hands and sat so quietly that they seemed like ghosts. Igor looked at me questioningly in the rearview mirror. I didn't know what to do. For the first time in my life, I, a man accustomed to controlling everything, found myself in a situation beyond the scope of business strategies. My first impulse was to take the children to the police. Let the state deal with it. But something stopped me. Perhaps it was Vera's gaze, a serious, unchildlike gaze, or the barely noticeable trembling of Nadia's hands, or the memory of how, as a child, I was afraid of government institutions with their cold walls and indifferent adults. I decided to take the girls to my country house, feed them, warm them up, and then figure things out. On the way, I questioned them. The story gradually unfolded, fragment by fragment. Their mother, Anna, had been sick for a long time. After her death, they remained with their stepfather, Sergei. He worked as a taxi driver, often drank, sometimes shouted at them, sometimes didn't come home for the night. Lately, Sergei had often talked on the phone with some woman. He said he was tired of fussing with other people's children, that he needed a normal life, that a double burden was beyond his strength. Vera talked about this calmly, as if she were retelling the plot of a cartoon, not a story of betrayal. In the morning, their stepfather gathered them, said that they were going to a new grandmother, dropped them off on the side of the road, told them to wait and promised to be back soon. He took their documents, saying that it was necessary. This was at 9 o'clock in the morning. 7 hours in the cold, without food, without warm clothes, with hope that was melting with each passing hour. When we arrived at my house, the girls looked at it with distrust. The huge building seemed unreal to them. I led them inside, turned the heating up to the maximum, asked the housekeeper, Marina, to prepare a hot dinner and find dry clothes. Marina looked at me in surprise but didn't ask questions. The girls ate silently, carefully, afraid of spilling or crumbling. From time to time, they exchanged glances, as if talking without words. After dinner, they started to nod off. The day, full of stress and cold, took its toll. I showed them the guest bedroom. They lay down on the huge bed, still holding hands. I asked if they needed anything else. Vera looked at me with her serious eyes and asked when her dad would come. I didn't know what to answer. I said that we would try to find him tomorrow. She nodded and closed her eyes. I left the room with a heavy heart. In the study, I poured myself a whiskey and sat by the window. Outside the glass, snow was falling, turning my well-groomed garden into a winter wonderland. But my thoughts were far from admiring nature. I was thinking about the person who could abandon 2 little children to their fate, about the woman who could agree to a relationship with such a person, about what would have happened to the girls if I hadn't driven by. The morning brought new worries. The girls woke up early. They were standing by the window and looking at the snow-covered garden. When I entered the room, Vera asked if her dad had come at night. I shook my head. The disappointment on her face was replaced by a strange relief. It seemed that part of her already understood that her stepfather would not return. The girls perked up a bit at breakfast. They happily ate the pancakes with jam that Marina had prepared. They answered my questions more willingly. I learned that they went to kindergarten, that they loved to draw and listen to fairy tales, that they had a cat, but it had run away a month ago, that they missed their mother every day. After breakfast, I decided to act. I called my lawyer, Mikhail, and explained the situation. He was shocked but quickly pulled himself together. He said that we needed to contact the police, report the abandoned children, find the Sergei, and bring him to justice, all according to the law. I agreed, but on one condition. The girls would stay with me until the situation was resolved.
No orphanilles, no temporary shelters.
Mikhail objected that this was impossible. I was not a relative, there were no documents, no legal grounds. I reminded him who I was and that nothing was impossible for me. That same day, we went to the police. The statement was accepted. The search for Sergei Petrov began. The girls behaved bravely, answering the investigators' questions. They described the apartment where they lived, named the neighbors, and told where their stepfather worked. The investigator looked at me suspiciously. A rich man with 2 other people's children always raises questions. I used all my influence to speed up the process. Calls to the right people, promises, threats, bribes if necessary. 2 days later, Sergei was found. He was renting an apartment on the other side of Moscow with a woman he had known for 3 months. Drunk, dirty, penniless. He didn't even try to hide. He just started a new life, erasing the old one. When he was told that the girls had been found, he expressed neither relief nor shame, only irritation. He said that he couldn't support them, that they weren't his relatives, that their mother had deceived him by not telling him that she had cancer, that he had spent all his savings on her treatment, and that now he just wanted to live normally. I was present at his interrogation, sitting in the corner of the office, listening to the stream of complaints and excuses. Rage was boiling inside me, the cold, calculating rage of a man accustomed to solving problems. I looked at this man and saw neither a father nor a man, but an empty space, not even worthy of contempt. After the interrogation, the investigator said that Sergei faced criminal liability, an article for abandoning them in danger and possible imprisonment, but the chances were slim. A first-time confession and repentance, which he would certainly portray in court, would most likely result in a suspended sentence and deprivation of parental rights, which he essentially didn't have anyway. The next day, I visited Sergei in the detention center. He was surprised by my arrival and even more surprised when I offered him money. 200,000 rubles in cash right now and another 300,000 after he signed all the necessary papers. A waiver of the children, consent to adoption, an obligation never to seek meetings with them. Sergei didn't hesitate for a second. Greed flared up in his eyes. He asked, "Why do I need this?" I replied that it was none of his business. He smirked and said that he never thought he could make money off these children. I barely restrained myself from hitting him right there in the visitor room under the surveillance cameras. The papers were signed the same day. Mikhail took care of everything. A notary, witnesses, seals, everything official, everything legal or almost legal. There is always room for maneuver in Russia if you have enough money and connections. In the evening, I told the girls that their dad had been found. They looked at me anxiously. Nadia asked, "Will he come for them?" I replied that no, he would no longer be their dad, that they didn't need to be afraid of him, that they could stay with me if they wanted, or I would find them a good family to take care of them. Vera looked at me for a long time, studying me, then asked why I wanted them to stay. I didn't know what to answer. The truth was too complicated. That I saw in them something that had never been in my life. Purity, innocence, strength, that I felt needed for the first time in many years, that the thought of them being separated and sent to different foster families was unbearable. I said that I had a big house and a lot of money and no one to share it with, that I was lonely, that they were wonderful girls who deserved the best, that I would try to be a good father if they gave me a chance. Vera exchanged glances with Nadia. Their silent conversation lasted a few seconds. Then she nodded and said that they agreed to try, but they needed to take their things from the old apartment, especially the photos of their mother. I promised that we would take everything. The next day, we went to their apartment. A small 2-room apartment in an old house on the outskirts of town with shabby walls, old furniture, and the smell of dampness and hopelessness. The girls quickly gathered their few belongings: clothes, books, toys, an album with photographs, which they held especially carefully. In the corner of the room, I noticed an empty bottle of vodka. On the table lay utility bills with red seals indicating debt. In the trash can were photos of a smiling woman with 2 little girls in her arms. Torn, discarded, forgotten. As we were leaving, a neighbor looked out of her apartment, an elderly woman with a tired face. She looked at the girls with recognition, then at me with suspicion, and asked who I was. I briefly explained the situation. She shook her head and said that she had long suspected that something would happen, that Sergei had completely given up lately, that she felt sorry for the children but couldn't do anything. I gave her my business card and told her to call if she had any questions or if she remembered something important about the girls' lives. She took the business card with distrust, looked at my suit, at the guard waiting at the door, at the expensive toys that I had bought the girls the day before. Then she looked at Vera and Nadia, who were standing close to each other, and her gaze softened. She said that she knew their mother. She was a good woman, hardworking, and caring. She married Sergei not long before her illness. She thought the children needed a father, but he turned out to be not a father but a burden. He drank her money, cheated on her while she was in the hospital, and after her death, he became completely outrageous. I listened and felt hatred growing inside me for the man I had only seen twice in my life, for the man who had betrayed the trust of a dying woman, who had thrown her children away like unwanted junk, who didn't even deserve the air he was breathing. Saying goodbye, the neighbor suddenly hugged the girls, said that she was glad that they had found a good home, looked at me and added that if I hurt these children, she would find me even if I were a billionaire 3 times over. I promised her that the girls would be happy, and it was the first promise in a long time that I intended to keep at any cost. The following weeks turned into a whirlwind of legal procedures: obtaining custody, collecting documents, checks by the guardianship authorities, interviews, character references, income statements, medical reports. The bureaucratic machine worked with a creak, but my influence and money opened many doors. In parallel, I was arranging the girls' new life. I hired the best designers to create a children's room for them, spacious, bright, with 2 identical beds and a huge toy closet, with a writing desk for studying, with a soft carpet for playing, with shelves for books. The designers suggested a princess room, all in pink. I refused. The room had to grow with the girls, not turn into a caramel fantasy. I enrolled Vera and Nadia in the best private school in Moscow. The director personally conducted the interview. Teachers developed an individual program to help them catch up with their peers. A psychologist worked with them 3 times a week, helping them cope with the trauma of losing their mother and the betrayal of their stepfather. My life changed completely. Meetings were postponed to times when the girls were at school. Business dinners were canceled. Foreign trips were postponed. Instead, there were evenings with board games, weekends in parks and museums, trips to the cinema, cartoons, reading fairy tales before bedtime. My business partners were shocked. Alexei Sokolov, the shark of business negotiations, a ruthless competitor, a man for whom profit always came first, was now refusing important meetings because of a school concert, carrying children's drawings in his wallet, smiling as he talked about the achievements of his girls. They thought I was crazy. Perhaps they were right, but with each passing day, I realized more and more that it was now that my life was gaining meaning. When Nadia first called me Dad, I felt something stir in my chest, something that I thought had long died: my heart. However, not everything was smooth. At night, the girls often had nightmares. They woke up screaming, crying, calling for their mother, afraid that they would be abandoned again. I sat by their beds for hours, holding their hands, assuring them that I would never leave them.
Vera adapted faster.
She was always the stronger, the protector. Despite her age, she felt responsible for her sister, for me, for our whole little world. She checked to see if I had eaten, reminded me of important meetings, and made sure that I didn't forget to take my blood pressure medication. Nadia was a dreamer, quiet and thoughtful. She could spend hours drawing or looking out the window, saying that she saw her mother in the clouds, that she heard her voice in the sound of the rain. She had a harder time coping with the changes. A new home, a new school, new people. All this scared her. The guardianship authorities continued to monitor us. Checks, reports, interviews with the children alone. I was nervous before each of their visits, although I remained calm outwardly. It seemed to me that they were looking for a reason to take the girls away, that it was not enough to just love and care for children, that my past, my lifestyle, my status could work against me. My circle of friends also changed. Many business partners distanced themselves. Some women I used to date stopped answering calls after learning about my new status as a single father. But new acquaintances appeared. Parents of the girls' classmates, teachers, coaches, ordinary people with whom I would never have communicated before. Among them was Elena, the school psychologist, a calm, intelligent woman with kind eyes and a soft smile. She helped the girls adapt to the new school, held classes with them, and talked to me about how best to build relationships with children. She was the first person who didn't look at me as a wealthy sponsor or an eccentric billionaire who decided to play at charity. Elena said that the girls were lucky to meet me, but in fact, I was lucky to meet them. They filled my empty life with meaning, taught me to see the world through different eyes, to appreciate simple things, to rejoice in small things, to love selflessly and unconditionally. However, the happier our little family became, the stronger the desire grew in me to punish the person who could have deprived the girls of their future, who had abandoned them on the road like unwanted kittens. I couldn't stop thinking about Sergei, about the fact that he had probably already forgotten about his actions, was living on, enjoying the money he had received from me, perhaps planning to start a new family, new children, whom he would also betray at the first opportunity. Thoughts of revenge haunted me. At night, when the girls were already asleep, I sat in my study and imagined different scenarios. I could destroy him financially. One call to the right people and he would never find a job in Moscow. I could ruin his reputation. An article in the newspaper about a man abandoning foster children with his name, with a photo, with details. But something stopped me. Not conscience, not morality, but the girls. What would they think when they grew up and found out that I had avenged their stepfather, that I had stooped to his level, that I had spent time and energy on revenge instead of directing them to caring for them? And yet, the idea of revenge did not let me go. Not for my sake, but for the sake of justice, for the sake of all the children who are abandoned by irresponsible adults, for the sake of Anna, who entrusted her children to a person unworthy of that trust. One evening, while looking through the album of photographs that the girls had brought from the old apartment, I found a picture that turned everything upside down. It showed Anna, the twins' mother, young, beautiful, smiling, despite the illness already visible in her sunken face, in her faded eyes. Next to her stood Sergei, pleased with himself, confident, with his hand on her shoulder and with a gold watch on his wrist. I looked closely. The watch was familiar to me. A Rolex Daytona, a model that I myself had worn several years ago, which I had lost at a charity event 3 years ago. I remembered discovering the loss at the end of the evening, contacting the security service, and reviewing the camera footage, but the watch was never found. I also remembered that there were many service personnel at that evening. Waiters, cloakroom attendants, drivers, all hired through an agency, all checked, or almost all. Suddenly, the picture came together. Sergei, a taxi driver, moonlighting as a waiter at elite events, stealing a watch worth his annual income, selling it or keeping it as a trophy, as proof that he too could touch luxury. A petty thief, a pathetic man, building his significance on stolen things. It was almost funny, almost ironic. The man who stole my watch later abandoned the children, whom I accepted as my own. Fate played strange jokes, but this particular joke gave my desire for revenge a new impetus. Now, it was not just an emotional decision, it was a restoration of justice, a symmetrical response from the universe. That evening, I made a decision. I will punish Sergei not for my sake, not for the lost watch long forgotten, but for the sake of the girls, for the sake of their mother, for the sake of all those he deceived and betrayed, and I will do it in such a way that the lesson will be remembered forever. The plan formed in my head in one sleepless night, clear, thoughtful, impeccable in its simplicity. I was not going to get my hands dirty, I was not going to break the law. I was not going to stoop to the level of physical violence. My revenge had to be elegant, refined, hitting the target accurately. In the morning, I called Oleg, the head of my security service, to me. He was a former FSB officer. He had worked for me for 10 years, carrying out delicate assignments, solving problems that the tax inspectorate was better off not knowing about, and never asking unnecessary questions. I explained the task to him. I need complete information about Sergei Petrov. Where he lives, who he meets, where he works, what his habits, weaknesses, fears, and ambitions are. I need to know everything about him, every detail of his miserable life. Oleg was not surprised. He was used to my unusual requests. He said that the information would be with me in 3 days. I specified that we needed to act carefully. No contacts with the subject, no traces. Petrov should not suspect that he is being watched. I myself began working on the second direction. I found all the documents related to the charity event 3 years ago. Lists of guests, staff, contractors, photos, videos. I vaguely remembered the face of the waiter serving our table. A young man, unremarkable, one of many. I looked through dozens of photos. Some showed waiters. Blurred figures in the background, faces turned in profile, hands holding out glasses. In one picture, I found what I was looking for. A waiter standing behind my chair. Sergei Petrov, younger, fitter, but undoubtedly him. The next day, Oleg brought the first results. Sergei Petrov, 38 years old, born in the Moscow region, graduated from a technical school, worked as a mechanic, a security guard, a driver. No criminal record, bad credit history, debts for alimony from his first marriage. His ex-wife lives in Saratov with a 12-year-old son. Petrov is currently renting a one-room apartment on the outskirts of Moscow, working in a taxi service, meeting a woman named Irina, a saleswoman from a supermarket. He drinks regularly, plays in online casinos, dreams of opening a car service, and complains to friends about life. I blamed others for all my problems. I was contemplating this information when Vera came into my office. She rarely bothered me during work hours, knowing that I had important calls and meetings in the morning. But now she was standing in the doorway with a serious face and an intense look. She asked, "Can we talk?" I put aside my papers and invited her to sit down. She climbed into the armchair opposite me, a small figure in a huge leather conference chair. She asked directly what I was planning to do with their former dad. I didn't expect such a question. I didn't think a 6-year-old could notice my changed moods, my long conversations with Oleg, my late nights at the computer. I started to deny it, saying that I didn't understand what she was talking about. Vera looked at me with her serious eyes and waited. She always knew how to wait, patiently, without pressure, just sitting and watching until the truth itself emerged through layers of lies and half-truths. I gave in, saying that I wanted the man who had abandoned them to get what he deserved. For him to know that such actions do not go unpunished, so that he could never hurt other children again. Vera listened attentively, then asked, "Will this help us? Will it make us feel better? Will we be happier? Or will it only stir up old wounds? Make us relive that terrible day on the side of the road? Make Nadia cry again at night?" I didn't know what to answer. The little girl was asking questions that I myself didn't dare to ask myself. She saw the essence of the problem more clearly than I did. An adult, educated, successful person. Vera said that she didn't want me to do anything bad, that she and Nadia were happy now, that they had a new home, a new life, a real dad who loved them. Why tarnish it with revenge on a person who no longer mattered? I looked at her and saw a wisdom that didn't match her age, wisdom born from suffering, from loss, from betrayal, from the need to be strong for her sister. Wisdom that I, with all my diplomas and titles, still had to learn. I promised her that I wouldn't do anything that could harm our family, that I wouldn't let the past destroy what we were building now, that I trusted her judgment more than my own anger. She smiled for the first time during our entire conversation, got out of the chair, came over and hugged me. Small arms around my neck, the childish scent of shampoo and apples, warmth that melted the ice in my soul. When she left, I sat motionless for a long time, thinking about what I had heard, about what I was going to do, about what really mattered, and realized that I couldn't just abandon the idea of revenge, but I couldn't continue as I had planned. I needed a new plan, a different approach. Revenge had to turn into something more, into a lesson, into redemption, into an opportunity for Sergei to realize what he had done and possibly change. I called Oleg and changed the assignment. Now I needed not only information about Petrov. I needed information about his son from his first marriage, about his relationship with his ex-wife, about the reasons for their divorce, about why he didn't participate in his child's life. Also, I instructed him to find people who knew Anna, the mother of the twins, her friends, colleagues, relatives, if there were any. I needed witnesses to her life, her struggle with the disease, her love for her daughters, her trust in the man who betrayed her last will. In parallel, I was studying codes of law, looking for precedents in cases of leaving children in danger, of deprivation of parental rights, of fraud with the property of the deceased. I wasn't a lawyer, but I was learning quickly, delving into details, finding loopholes, building a new plan based not on revenge, but on justice. A week later, Oleg brought new information. Sergei Petrov's story turned out to be even darker than I had imagined. He abandoned his son from his first marriage when the boy was 3 years old and left Saratov without leaving an address. For years he hid from alimony payments, changing jobs as soon as the bailiffs found him. His ex-wife, Tatiana, raised her son alone, scraping by with odd jobs. The story with Anna repeated the same scenario. Sergei appeared in her life when she was already ill, presented himself as a successful businessman, charmed her, married her, gained access to her savings and the apartment that she had saved for her daughters. When the money ran out and her condition worsened, he began to distance himself, look for excuses not to be around, and date other women. Her friend Natalia told Oleg that before her death, Anna asked Sergei to take care of the girls. He swore that he would take care of them as if they were his own, that he would never leave them, that he would do everything to make them grow up happy. She died believing his promises. This information only strengthened my resolve. I couldn't allow Sergei to continue destroying lives. I couldn't allow him to find a new victim, a new lonely mother, new children, to whom he would give hope and then take it away. But I also remembered the promise I had made to Vera. Not to do anything that could harm our family, not to allow revenge to poison our lives, not to sink to the level of the man I despised. And then the final plan was born. Not just punishment, not just retribution, but a complete systemic change in Sergei Petrov's life, his rebirth through awareness of his own actions, through meeting the consequences of his actions, through the opportunity for redemption which he would most likely reject. I worked out the details, calculated the risks, made a schedule, and set the date for the start of the operation. Revenge had to be cold, well thought out, impeccable, like good, expensive cognac, like a precise Swiss mechanism, like an impeccably tailored suit. The first step was a meeting with Tatiana, Sergei's ex-wife. I sent Mikhail to Saratov with a specific task, to offer her free legal assistance in obtaining all accumulated alimony, anonymously, from a charitable foundation supporting single mothers. Mikhail carried out the assignment perfectly. Tatiana, tired of fighting alone, agreed. The documents were filed in court. The process began. Sergei received the first notice of debt collection for alimony. The amount, including penalties for years of evasion, was more than 1 million rubles. He panicked, tried to hide, changed apartments, quit his job as a taxi driver, but our security service didn't lose sight of him, and the bailiffs, who had received anonymous information about his new place of residence and unofficial income, were persistent. In parallel, I anonymously paid for Sergei's son's education in a good private school. The boy was capable, but the family couldn't afford a decent education. I also created a trust fund in his name, funds from which he could receive, upon reaching the age of 18, enough to pay for university, start a business, and build a life unburdened by debt and deprivation. The second step was an anonymous article in a popular online publication. The story of a man who abandoned his adopted daughters on the highway, without names, without precise details that could identify the participants, but with an emotional description of what happened, with comments from psychologists about the trauma that abandoned children experience, with interviews with former victims of similar situations. The article quickly spread across the internet, was discussed on forums, and caused a wave of outrage. People demanded that the villain be found and punished, called for stricter legislation, and shared their own stories of parental betrayal. Sergei, of course, recognized himself in this story and began to get nervous, fear exposure, and suspect that someone was watching him. His new girlfriend, Irina, who had read the article, began to ask questions, inquire about his past, and doubt his stories about himself. The third step was an anonymous letter to Irina with photographs of Sergei and Anna, with copies of documents about the marriage, with information about what happened to the twins, with details about his first marriage and his abandoned son, with evidence of his lies about his own past and financial situation. Irina was shocked, caused a scandal, broke off the relationship, and told all her friends and colleagues about everything. Sergei's name became a household name in their circle, a symbol of betrayal and meanness. The fourth step was an official appeal to the police on behalf of the Charitable Foundation for the Protection of Children with a demand to renew the criminal case against Sergei Petrov on the fact of leaving children in danger, with new evidence, with testimonies of witnesses, with expert opinions on the severity of the psychological trauma inflicted on the children. The case was reopened. Sergei was summoned for questioning, then for a face-to-face confrontation with a neighbor who had seen how he treated the girls after their mother's death, with a saleswoman from the store where he bought alcohol with money intended for the children, with a nurse from the hospital where Anna was lying, who had heard his promise to take care of her daughters. In parallel, I initiated a check of Sergei's financial transactions after Anna's death. It turned out that he had sold some of her belongings, cashed out insurance policies, rented out an apartment formerly owned by the girls as heirs, and appropriated the money. A new criminal case, new charges, new problems. The fifth step was the posting of announcements about missing children in the area where Sergei lived, with photographs of Vera and Nadia, with information that they had been abandoned by their stepfather and had gone missing. The announcements were posted every night, despite the fact that they were torn down during the day. They appeared on the entrance of Sergei's house, at his work, in places where he frequented. People began to recognize Sergei, point at him, whisper behind his back, and call him a hater, a degenerate, a monster. He couldn't go outside in peace, couldn't go to the store, couldn't get a job. As soon as his identity became known, Petrov began to drink even more. His financial situation worsened, debts grew, creditors demanded repayment of money, and the landlord threatened eviction for late payments. Former friends turned away, fearing association with a man whose name had become a household name. The sixth step was a visit to Sergei. Not by me. I wasn't going to dirty my hands with personal contact. Oleg hired an actor, an elderly, respectable man with an imposing appearance. He introduced himself as the lawyer for the family that adopted the twins. The conversation was recorded on a hidden camera. The actor informed Sergei that his actions hadn't gone unpunished, that the children had found a new home, a new family, that they would receive the best education, the best treatment, the best opportunities, everything that he should have provided for them, but didn't want to. He also reported that Sergei's son from his first marriage would now also receive all the necessary education, support, and a chance for a better life, and that Sergei would never again be able to harm any child, because now he was being watched, he was known, his story was known, and any attempt to start a new family would be stopped. Sergei was crushed. He cried, begged for mercy, swore that he had realized his mistakes, that he wanted to make amends, that life had punished him enough. The actor listened silently, then handed him an envelope and said that he had a choice. There were two things in the envelope: a train ticket to Saratov and the address of a rehabilitation center for alcoholics in the Moscow region. The choice between trying to atone and running away from responsibility, between the opportunity to start all over again and continuing to exist on the beaten track. The actor explained the conditions. If Sergei chooses Saratov, he must find his son, apologize to his ex-wife, get a job, start paying alimony, participate in the boy's life, and become a father, not just a biological donor. If he chooses the rehabilitation center, he must complete a full course of treatment for alcoholism, visit a psychotherapist, work on himself, and after leaving the center, go as a volunteer to an orphanage to help children left without parents, to possibly atone for at least part of his guilt before society. The actor gave Sergei 24 hours to think about it, said that he would return at the same time tomorrow for an answer, and that whether his persecution would end or only begin in earnest depended on that answer. The actor returned a day later. Sergei's apartment was empty. The things had disappeared. The neighbors said that he had moved out at night, had left no address, had not said goodbye, had simply disappeared, as he had done more than once in his life, when the problems became too serious. I wasn't surprised. I didn't expect a man of his kind to be able to choose the difficult path of redemption. Too weak, too selfish, too used to running away from responsibility. I instructed Oleg to find Sergei. It wasn't difficult. He went not to Saratov, not to a rehabilitation center, but to Rostov-on-Don, to a distant relative. He hoped to get lost, start with a clean slate, forget about the past, about the children he had betrayed, about the women he had deceived, about everyone he had hurt. But the past didn't let him go. In Rostov, he was already awaited by printed leaflets with his story, publications in local social media groups, anonymous calls to potential employers. He changed apartments, changed names, changed cities, but I didn't allow him to hide, didn't allow him to start a new cycle of deception and betrayal. The final blow was the visit of Tatiana and her son. I organized their trip to Rostov, paid for the hotel, and hired a private detective to find Sergei's exact location. They came to him without warning, the boy who grew up without a father, the woman who learned to live without male support. They didn't demand money, didn't accuse, didn't shout, just stood before him, a living reminder of his first betrayal, of the first time he chose the easy path instead of responsibility. The boy looked at his father with curiosity, but without hope, without illusions. He had long since learned to live without this man and didn't need him. This was the final point of my revenge. Not physical pain, not financial collapse, not imprisonment, but the realization of the complete, absolute worthlessness of one's own life. The understanding that all his attempts to escape the consequences of his actions are in vain. That the world has not forgotten, has not forgiven, and will not allow him to forget. I don't know what happened to Sergei after that. My people reported that he broke down, started drinking, lost his job, his home, and sank to the social bottom, becoming one of those homeless people that we stopped noticing on the streets of big cities. Perhaps there is some justice in this, perhaps it is too cruel even for him, but it was his choice, his decision, his path. And I had more important concerns. My little family, my girls, their future, which I vowed to make happy at any cost. 3 years have passed since I found Vera and Nadia on the side of the road. 3 years that have changed my life completely. 3 years filled with new meaning, new worries, new joys. The girls have grown up. Now they are 9 years old. They are still as similar as two peas in a pod in appearance, but their characters are becoming more and more different. Vera, serious, responsible, is fond of mathematics and chess. Nadia, creative, emotional, can spend hours drawing or playing the piano. We moved from Moscow to the suburbs, bought a large house with a garden, with swings in the yard, with a pool, with a separate room for creativity, where the girls can draw, sculpt, and craft. We got a golden retriever dog named Rex, whom the girls adore and who follows them everywhere. I changed my work schedule, stopped spending 12 hours at the office, delegated more authority, and hired additional managers. Now I work mainly from home, attend parent-teacher meetings, take the girls to classes, help with homework, and read fairy tales before bed. Elena, the school psychologist, has become a part of our lives, first as a specialist helping the girls adapt, then as a family friend, and now as something more. We started dating a year ago, slowly, cautiously, with an eye on the girls, who were used to my attention belonging only to them. But they accepted Elena easily, perhaps because she never tried to replace their mother, or because they saw me smile next to her, or simply because she is a kind, sincere person who really loves children and knows how to find an approach to everyone. We don't talk about Sergei. His name is not mentioned in our house. But sometimes, in particularly emotional moments, the girls still remember that day on the road. Fear, cold, a feeling of abandonment. I hug them and promise that this will never happen again, that I will always be there, that they are safe and they believe me. I created a trust fund for Vera and Nadia, money that will secure their future. Education at the best universities, the opportunity to travel, study the world, develop their talents, and choose a profession according to their calling, not out of necessity. Also, I founded a charitable foundation to help children left without parental care, a foundation working throughout Russia, providing legal support, psychological assistance, financial support, opportunities for education and development, and a chance for a better life for those who started it in unfavorable conditions. I don't regret my revenge, but I'm not proud of it either. It was a necessity, a restoration of balance in the universe, a justice that the system couldn't provide. But revenge didn't bring me satisfaction, didn't fill the emptiness, didn't heal the wounds. Only love could do that. Love for the girls who have become my daughters in every sense except biological. Love for the woman who shared this responsibility with me. Love for life, which, for all its unpredictability, sometimes presents amazing gifts. Yesterday evening, we were sitting in the living room. Nadia was playing a melody that she had composed herself on the piano. Vera was reading a book, making notes in a notebook. Elena was making tea in the kitchen, and Rex was dozing by the fireplace. I looked at this picture and felt absolute, complete happiness. Vera looked up from her book, caught my eye, and smiled. Then she came over, sat next to me on the sofa, and snuggled up quietly, so that Nadia, engrossed in the music, wouldn't hear. She said that she was remembering today the day we met, how scared she was, how she didn't believe that everything could end well, how she held Nadia's hand and promised her that they would always be together, no matter what happened. And then she leaned closer to my ear and whispered words that made my heart clench, words that were worth all the billions in the world, all the successes, all the achievements. Simple words from a 9-year-old girl, once abandoned on the road, but now found her real home. Thank you for finding us, Dad. Thank you for loving us. Thank you for being there. And I, a man who never allowed himself to show weakness, a man who kept his emotions under control during the toughest negotiations, a man who didn't even cry at his father's funeral, felt a tear roll down my cheek, a tear of gratitude to fate for this moment, for these children, for this house, for this life filled with meaning. I hugged Vera, kissed her on the top of her head, and promised that I would never give them reason to doubt my love, that I would be there, no matter what happened, that I would support them, guide them, protect them, but never limit their freedom, their right to be themselves, their right to choose their own path. Nadia finished playing and joined us on the sofa. Elena brought tea and cookies. The four of us sat together, talked, laughed, planned summer vacations, discussed books, movies, and music. An ordinary evening for an ordinary family. But for me, it was a miracle that began with 2 small figures on the side of the road on a cold March day. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I had chosen a different route that day, or driven past without paying attention to the strange picture, or stopped the car but called the police instead of taking the children with me. How many wonderful moments I would have missed, how much love I would not have experienced, how empty my life would have been, full of money and power, but devoid of real emotions. They say that we all meet by chance, that every meeting is predetermined by fate and has its own meaning, its own purpose. I don't know if this is true, but I know that meeting Vera and Nadia changed me, made me better, taught me to love selflessly, to care, to give without expecting anything in return. And if this is the meaning of life, then I have finally found it in simple things, in children's laughter, in family dinners, in the opportunity to see 2 small personalities entrusted to me by fate grow and develop, in the chance to leave behind not only money and a business empire, but also a living legacy of 2 wonderful girls who may make this world a little better. And what could be more important than that?